across the state, such as the July 4th flooding events. For TPWD, preparedness starts at the level of the 5 field divisions: state parks, wildlife, inland fisheries, and coastal fisheries, and law enforcement. For the people and the facilities, each facility creates its own site-specific emergency plan. Coordination for large-scale events, such as Hurricane Harvey, is handled through the coordinated, scalable, and flexible framework rooted in TPWD's Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, where we set up a department-level emergency operations center. Our colonel will go into the details of game warden response to the recent flooding events, so I wanted to take this opportunity to share an example of how plans are put into action by focusing on the response of our state parks team to the recent flooding events. On July 3rd, the State Parks Emergency Management Specialist advised park superintendents around 12:30 p.m. that day about the intensity and path of the storm and advised them to activate park-specific emergency management plans. In addition to having our game wardens' permanent presence on the State Operations Center, the State Park Coordinator arrived at the SOC early on the morning of July 4th, where he continued to feed water level and storm information to the State Parks team. Our Parks team took quick action and relocated or evacuated park visitors to get them out of potential harm's way. In some cases, visitors were advised to stay in the park, but out of the flood zones, rather than drive on the dangerous roads outside of the park. There were 22 of our state parks that were impacted with full or partial closures. 359 visitors were also relocated or evacuated out of our parks. There were no injuries and there were no casualties. The effectiveness of the team's response is the result of internal communication from emergency management at the department and division level, and having the knowledge and skill to carry out the emergency plan. Chairman, in addition to the preparation and execution of the state parks and state parks police officers, your Texas game wardens executed their response to the July 4th floods with great professionalism. I joined our colonel and our team in Kerrville early afternoon of July 4th as the response started to hit full stride. But the game wardens had pre-positioned the day before and had been there and active since the early morning hours, and more were arriving every minute. The team had command presence, getting assets on the water and in the air via drone and helicopter for search and rescue operations. This followed up days later with search and rescue and recovery operations as the work continued. I'm very proud of the response of our game wardens, state park police, state park staff. They did an incredible job under unbelievable conditions. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions as we go through the panel.
Yes, thank you for your testimony. At this time, we'll go to Ron Vanderroos. You're testifying neutrally on behalf of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you, Colonel. You may begin.
Chairman, for the record, Ron Vanderroos, Colonel for the Texas Game Wardens. First of all, would like to send a heartfelt thanks, or I should say a heartfelt gratitude to all the victims and those that were affected this flood. I think I speak for the entire department when I say that it was all hands on deck, and we are very respectful of the things that happened during those floods. To that end, I think it's important to maybe discuss and give an overview of Texas Game Wardens' positions as it comes to emergency management being the first thing. To that end, Texas Game Wardens have a full-time employee at the Department of Emergency Management State Operations Center that's staffed 24/7 when it's activated, and which is critical to our response and the way that game wardens respond to critical incidences across the state. In addition to that, we have a full-time member on the state's Emergency Management Council, which is the council that advises the governor during any natural disaster that occurs. To that end, the specifics that game wardens hold is kind of unique, and I'll go in that here in a minute. The fact is that we have both a law enforcement function as well as a search and rescue function. So we sit on two of the emergency service functions that advise the governor during those disasters. To that end, excuse me, Game wardens are pretty specifically focused on the ability to respond to a law enforcement situation and a search and rescue situation, specifically by the way we train. And that being said is that those that are graduates of the Game Warden Training Center are certified peace officers with statewide authority. In addition to that, every game warden has a standard level of search and rescue ability. In addition to the one function that makes us really unique and primarily responsive is our community-oriented policing facet, and that embeds us in the communities in this state, which allows us to do the things we do that are unique to any other search and rescue and or law enforcement function that occurs. To that end, our ability to work with the Texas Department of Emergency Management, having folks on scene, and our ability to coordinate with them on pre-deployments was part of the success of the Hill Country flooding. To that end, a quick overview of the Law Enforcement Division. We're over 500 Texas game wardens that serve a pretty unique function in all 254 counties. That includes four-wheel drive trucks, boats, special search and rescue boats that are designated for swift water, our helicopters with hoist capabilities that were critical in the Kerrville flood response as it stood, in addition to our K-9 units, our drone units, our dive and search and rescue groups. As Central Texas began to flood in the early mornings of July 4th, we were staffed fully at the SOC beginning July 3rd. And we began to pre-deploy assets on July 3rd across the Hill Country with the belief that there could be potential flooding, which was critical in the response as we were game wardens. So in the early mornings of July 4th, as the flash flooding intensified, game wardens responded with a quick reaction force that had been pre-staged with over 169 game wardens and 200 specialized pieces of assets that began automatic search and rescues that morning before sunrise. Our teams operated across the Guadalupe, Concho, Colorado, and San Gabriel River systems, responding to multiple impacted areas that were rapidly rising water and dangerous currents. In the Hill Country response to date, 375 game wardens responded that day to search and rescue activities. Over 475 assets were employed during those responses. 33 life-saving evacuations happened that morning, and over 400 people were evacuated in the Hill Country by game wardens. To that end, it was remarkable, the work, and it was a team effort across the board by not only just Parks and Wildlife, but also all the first responders that was there. I had testified earlier the fact that been doing this for almost 26 years and responded to every major natural disaster that's occurred in the state. Heroic efforts across the board on a very, very sad day. To that end, Texas game wardens continue to stand by and be ready to respond to the state of Texas.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll move on to Mr. Tim Birdsong. You are testifying neutrally on behalf of Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Please proceed.
For the record, my name is Tim Birdsong, Director of the Inland Fisheries Division of Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and I'm here to talk about flood impacts on fish and wildlife. And I'll also highlight some river restoration investments that have been made following other catastrophic floods that occurred in 2015 on the Blanco River and 2018 on the Llano River. Just to give you an example of the kind of resources that are being mobilized now to support river restoration in Kerr County. So back in 2015 with the Memorial Day flood, on the Blanco we saw similar devastating impacts to the river corridor, so lots of those large cypress trees that were downed or lost, and we saw a scouring effect of the understory, so you have shrubs and grasses and other vegetation that's really important cover for terrestrial wildlife. It also provides that important kind of buffering role for those stream systems. And we, for decades, have invested considerably, especially in hill country streams, in providing technical guidance and planning assistance and cost share incentives through programs like our landowner incentive program and more recently our farm and ranch lands conservation program. But our wildlife biologists and fisheries biologists are daily interacting with landowners along these river corridors and spring systems and recharge features to shore up protections for those habitats, and again, we invest considerably in restoration. But following the Blanco floods, we saw the need to act. These rivers, there is a seed bank that exists there in the floodplain, so the vegetation will come back. But everybody wants to do the right thing. They want to get in the game and try to help the river heal. So you see heavy equipment, you see things, you see investments that where folks are trying to do the right thing. They, gravel dredging, other things that are happening that really do not support long-term healing of the river. And so we jumped into action. Over the 3 years following those 2015 floods, we organized.
If you push it back a little bit, it's like 6 inches away, might be better.
All right. Yeah, so we organized 16 different workshops for landowners, about 500 different landowners that we stepped through best practices on how to manage these forested buffers, these riparian areas as we refer to them. And tools, resources available for them to do the right thing by the river and help the river heal. So over 18,000 plants, we're talking tree saplings, other forms of vegetation that were propagated in nurseries that we made available to those landowners to support riparian planting projects. We also had field days and conservation demonstration sites that we were able to secure with willing landowners to get other conservation professionals that were engaged in the river restoration, as well as partnering landowners to get out on the site, get their hands dirty, and see what it takes to restore a river corridor. We also had lots of materials that we published, and I can show you examples of these My Healthy Stream and, your owner's manual for the riparian area, but really, lots of resources made available to landowners to help them in this effort. And again, programs that are set up to cost share restoration, funding that flows through the U.S. Farm Bill, funding that flows through a number of other funding sources that are available to TPWD to be able to support restoration. So getting resources in the hands of partnering landowners and local community partners to implement that kind of work. So yes, devastating floods on the Blanco in 2015. Fast forward fall of 2018, similar floods on the Llano. We had a similar response type effort for the Llano. And now fast forward to the impacts on the Guadalupe. We did have moderate flooding on the Guadalupe back in October of 2018. And with this severe flooding that we had on the Llano in fall of 18, it provided an opportunity for us to really examine impacts to fish and wildlife. We had active fish tracking studies. So we had tags on fish during those floods, and we had an opportunity to see what happens. Where do those fish go? A lot of anglers are concerned that those fish get blown out downstream. That's not the case. And fish and wildlife are very resilient, and particularly fish that live in the hill country in these really flashy, spring-fed limestone systems. Every time there's a major rainfall event, or at least if it falls in the right place, you're going to see a rise in flows, and those fish respond to that. So with the tagged fish, what we saw was that Guadalupe bass, our official state fish, really recreationally important fish found in central Texas streams, about 75% of those fish stayed in the same, during that flood, they hung out in the same reach of river. And what they do is they find current refuge downstream of a boulder or some other structure in the river. They'll find a pocket of refuge from the high velocities, or they'll move out onto the edge of the river, particularly out into the floodplain where it's slower moving. And not only do they stay put, but some of those fish will move upstream. They're just programmed to do that, and that's part of what fish do after drought conditions to kind of repopulate, recolonize reaches of river. So 25% of the fish that we had tagged moved upstream. And some of the tagged fish moved 4 miles upstream. They moved up over 8 different low-head dams and low-water crossings to repopulate upper reaches of the river. So that's a common response for fish in these flood-prone systems. And for wildlife, terrestrial wildlife, we're talking reptiles, amphibians, mammals, birds that are in that vegetated riparian corridor along the river. They're mobile. They're going to get out of the way for the most part. At a population level, they're getting out of the way. They're moving into the uplands, and we're, as evidenced by a lot of landowners that are calling us right now saying, I'm seeing these species moving up into my area that I've never seen before, and what's that? And so yes, the vegetation was destroyed. They're moving up. They're finding other habitat and cover. As that vegetation rebounds, they're going to move back into the system. So terrestrial wildlife are going to be fine. Fish are going to be fine at a population level, so long as we can help those river corridors recover. And I'm talking about the forested vegetation. We've got to help those areas rebound. So there was a workshop held last night Hill Country Alliance, some other local partners organized. There are 2 more this week where they're trying to engage in these community conversations in Kirk County and help landowners get access to the resources that I referenced earlier. And we as a department are already refocusing some of our wildlife and fisheries biologists to prepare for the kind of tech guidance and planning assistance and financial incentives that we've implemented previously on the land-owned Blanco and elsewhere. But those kinds of investments are not unique to, post-flood recovery. This is what our staff are doing every day out there in the Hill Country, trying to work with cooperating landowners to bring, keep those systems intact and healthy. The Texas Farm and Ranch Lands Program, our conservation easement program, primary focus of that program is shoring up protections for water quality, water quantity, and so protecting springs and recharge features, grasslands, riparian areas, streams. That's a big focus of what that program has invested in, and lots of ranches in the Hill Country, working ranches in the Hill Country that have been protected over the last 8 years and 9 years since that program was authorized at TPWD. So those are examples of what we're investing in. We're going to have a series of public scoping meetings that we'll have this fall once we have completed surveys and have a better understanding of the impacts to these systems. And I'm talking about, surveys to understand any sort of hazards to navigation, safety for paddlers, wade fishermen, other anglers, and recreational users of these systems that were impacted. Once we do those assessments of river recreation areas, do some of our standard fish and wildlife surveys, we're going to put together these action plans, these conservation plans for those systems, and hold the public scoping meetings to get input from stakeholders on those plans, and also look for partners to help leverage resources and get that work implemented. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. I apologize about the microphone issue.
No, that's fine.
We'll work through that as we go out throughout the morning. But thank you all for your testimony. I have a couple questions, and then members, if you don't mind asking your questions. So regarding our state parks, do we have any specific warning system? I know you said 89 state parks? Is that correct?
89 state
89.
parks, yes.
And I'm sure
Soon to
they
be
all-
90 in
Very
hopefully
soon.
about a week.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So I know they all vary in size
Yeah.
and topograph and all that, but any specific warning systems at various parks? How do you notify, I guess, visitors? Are there sirens, or what warning systems? How do we protect our visitors at our parks?
Yeah, we don't currently at any of our state parks have any sirens that's been talked about over the last couple of weeks. We do have a text messaging system, so when you register to come in, be part of the park, we get a phone number. What we're going to work on is try to identify, if there's a flood coming, identify those campsites very specifically that would be in that flood zone. So that's something the state parks team is working on with the vendor of our reservation system.
Great.
Yeah.
Throughout all this, it's evident that cell phone service is not readily available. We'll hear from a camp panel, shortly. I was at Camp Waldemar about a week before the disaster occurred, and no cell phone service in that area, and something other committees are looking into. But just, I know y'all are working on that at Parks and Wildlife, a notification system.
Yeah. If I may,
please,
Chairman, I think
please.
that's an important point, is that, some of our parks are pretty remote, and so the availability of mobile service is sketchy at best or non-existent. So that's something that I think, hearing from the Colonel as well and others, that's getting that communication bandwidth opened up is going to be important for a lot of stakeholders.
Yes, thank you, David. And Colonel, thank you for all your tremendous work and efforts with, your crew. It's amazing what y'all did, and so thank you, and please express our gratitude and appreciation to you and your team. Just amazing, appreciate everything. How was it, the coordination between local emergency management, DPS, our federal partners in this response? Anything we can improve on? Just feel free to Just tell us what your thoughts are.
Yeah, well, maybe we can figure these microphones
Yeah,
out here in
exactly.
just a second.
Right.
In any of these major disasters, it's a controlled chaos situation. You mentioned the cooperation between state assets. I'll tell you, I think it was about as good as it could get. The groups that came together and the masses that had to come together did a really good job. We still have some communication issues at an emergency response level. I think Chief Kidd mentioned that and testified to that last week regarding just some interoperability issues with all the trunking systems that exist out there. It posed some problems. And to your point earlier, when you rely on cell phone communication, and we had actually gaps, by Camp Mystic and those kind of things that caused us some challenges as first responders as well, trying to work through some of those challenges and looking at things like Starlink that got us up and running. So I think the coordination was really good, especially between state agencies. There's always room to improve, and we're in process with that as looking at our after-action report so that we make sure that we fill any gaps that existed there.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And then, Mr. Birdsong, thank you for your testimony regarding the forest vegetation, or I guess it'd be revegetation, right? Reforest vegetation. And you're looking along the area of the Guadalupe River. Would that be the North Fork, or where are we talking about?
Yeah, the
You
most
kinda go
significant
over
impact was to the South Fork.
South Fork,
And then
okay.
the North Fork. The Johnson Creek, the third major tributary of the Guadalupe, was less impacted. That's actually the location of our fishery science center. Like our statewide science center is located there on Johnson Creek, and there were no impacts to that facility. That's our home base really for conserving fish in the Guadalupe River headwaters. We've been operating there for 30-plus years to restore our state fish, Guadalupe bass, in its namesake river there. But that facility celebrates its 100th anniversary this year, actually. Big deal for us. But yeah, the North Fork, South Fork, the big focus will be in those areas, but we're looking more broadly to all the flood impacted areas. So there was significant flooding and impacts on the San Saba, the San Gabriel, the Llano, and so we're working across all those systems to look for opportunities to restore and conserve these riparian areas.
You took my next question about your fishery. I passed it many times. Members, any questions for this panel? Yes, Mr. Pursuit.
One of the things that has been on my mind a lot with this particular disaster is it seems the ultra hazard here was nighttime accommodation, right? You had a rapid flood event happen at night while people were asleep. And it seems, and I'm no expert at this, and I've been trying to keep up with the testimony at the other hearings, but it seems like that is the common theme with this. And, naturally, we can't predict everything. We can't prevent every hazard. I mean, life is inherently unpredictable, but I don't know if, as part of your review of this for our park systems, but it seems like we were fortunate because Guadalupe State Park was downstream. So we had a lot more warning there than some of the other camps upstream, it seems to me. But I don't know if you've looked at, or I'd encourage you to maybe look at in our parks where the overnight accommodation pads are for RVs and campgrounds and things. Are they in the flash flood plain? And if so, do we need to modify any of our procedures or input, additional alert systems that will wake people up if something were to happen? I mean, fortunately, with Guadalupe State Park so far downstream, there's a lot of warning, and I think that helped tremendously. But I'm looking at a few of them like Garner or South Llano that are more near the headwaters, right, where an event in a different area may present a unique hazard, right? So I don't know. Have y'all looked at whether or not any of our campgrounds are in those floodplains, and are you taking that into consideration when you're thinking about any revisions to the emergency response plans?
Yeah, excellent question. We are new parks going forward, right? Obviously, going to build outside the 500-year floodplain. These legacy parks where we weren't having 500-year, 1,000-year type floods, we do have some assets down in the floodplain. Now, luckily, we've turned most of those assets into day use only,
Yeah.
so not having RVs or campsites down there. But we still had to, at Guadalupe as an example, we still had to evacuate some of those lower campsites, even though they were above the 500-year floodplain, just out of safety for our campers. But also, as happens, people get curious about, oh, here's the floodwaters. I want to go down and take a look at the floodwater. So part of moving campers back or out was to keep people away from the floodwaters when they did arrive.
Sure.
One of the things that State Parks team is already working on is being in a position to, and this sounds very simple, in addition to the text communication, but just having the public announcement equipment to have park hosts and park staff go through the campsites, let people know through a PA system it's time to move out, get people moving, and then we go campsite to make sure they are moved. So simple fixes like that can really add a lot of time to the or reduce time through the evacuation procedures.
Got it.
Yeah,
Thank you, thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Representative. Members, any other questions for this panel? Seeing none, thank you all for being here today, and thank you for all your work you do.
Thank you, Chairman.
Appreciate you. This time, the chair calls Mr. Joseph Bell from the Texas Historical Commission. Thank you, Mr. Bell, for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good with the good microphone.
Yeah, that's the good microphone, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll find out shortly.
Yeah, hopefully.
I'd like for you to speak on the vulnerability of Texas monuments and historic sites to natural disasters and any recommendations to improve their resiliency. For the record, your name is Joseph Bell, and you are testifying neutrally on behalf of Texas Historical Commission. Is that correct?
Correct.
Fantastic. Please proceed.
All right. Good morning, Chairman and committee members. I'm Joseph Bell, the Executive Director of the Texas Historical Commission, and Chairman now, since his best. With me today is Brad Jones, who is the Texas State Archaeologist, as well as Justin Cochran, who is the lead project reviewer for federal projects during disasters. I'm here to report on the agency's efforts addressing the threat of natural disasters on historic properties in Texas. The agency is actively working to address visitor safety at our 42 state historic sites. We are looking at developing and updating a more comprehensive and natural disaster plan to address many of the different regions that we have properties. We have properties throughout the state. We are actually ranking each of the properties from a different level, from very high to low, and we're using the FEMA National Risk Index to be able to determine what additional protection is necessary for each one of those properties. The agency has properties, as I said, from the Rio Grande with Port Isabel Lighthouse, the Charles and Marianne Goodnight Ranch in the Panhandle, from the McGoffin Home in El Paso to Sabine Pass on the border of Louisiana. In the last 10 years, we have had several natural disasters impacting historic sites. Hurricane Harvey had a direct hit on Rockport and the Fulton Mansion. The mansion's roof was peeled back. The interior was exposed to rainwater. Gallons of water inundated the structure. Despite carefully preparing for the hurricane, we relocated furnishings and artifacts to the upper floors. But of course, with the removal of the roof, everything became exposed. And it took 2 years to repair damages and reopen the mansion to visitors. A lot of that we were dealing with FEMA, and we found that very frustrating. And that's where we began to look at the possibility of insurance through storm. With storm, at least by having insurance in place, we could act a lot quicker and not having to deal with the federal bureaucracy necessary through FEMA applications. The same hurricane impacted Barner Hog Plantation. Floodwaters reached the main house and isolated the surrounding neighborhood. And site staff worked diligently with the local officials and assisted in evacuating neighbors across the property because that was the only course of evac. In 2019, Caddo Mounds was impacted by an EF4 tornado. On that day, we were hosting the Caddo Cultures Day with over 100 people on site. The visitor center was completely destroyed. Luckily, with having 100 people on site, we only had one fatality. Parks and Wildlife assisted us tremendously during that point in time. They worked with helping us clean up the site, remove debris, cut down trees that were impeding access by EMT access. A lot of the injured were medevaced out because the roads were all impassable. And then they also helped us with law enforcement to keep everything from not being looted. Today, the visitor center is rebuilt, strengthened with reinforced bathrooms that could act as refugees for the public during the storm. And that actually, the reopening of that was done by Representative Cody Harris. He was our main speaker at that grand reopening. Last year, of course, we were dealing with Charles and Marianne Goodnight Ranch in the Panhandle, which was threatened with the Panhandle wildfires. We quickly mobilized and were able to create fire breaks around that property to protect it from any potential threat. Recently, of course, we've had threats at Landmark Inn in Castroville, adjacent to the Medina River. The water came very close to the historic structure, but luckily there was no significant impact or damage. Historic Sites has emergency action plans in place for each site, which are updated annually, and they're integrated into our continuity of operational plan. Historic Sites also has designated regional response centers with supplies that are strategically located so that we can respond across the state. And then we also cross-train staff to assist when needed to do any emergency response. Also, luckily, we also have a memorandum of an agreement with Texas Parks and Wildlife providing mutual aid and support during emergencies, and that was one of the recommendations from Sunset. And we have activated that a number of times, particularly at Fulton Mansion and at Caddo. The National Park Service requires the state historic preservation offices across the nation to prepare a 10-year statewide preservation plan. And I am designated by the governor as the Texas State Historic Preservation Officer. The Texas plan is created through a process of on-site engagements with stakeholders and surveys, so that it's actually a plan that's actually created from the local level. And these three plans are really focused. There are three supplements to that plan that are really focused on disaster recovery. Each provides recommendation to improve coordination efforts and guide owners and local officials in disaster planning efforts and response. And we've actually forwarded those documents to the committee. There's more than 3,000 historic structures and historic sites that are listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This includes 350 districts that encompass over 30,000 historic resources, and those are both public and privately owned. The total doesn't also represent the total resources available in the state, but are merely the ones that are actually recorded and on file. The Texas Historical Society also works with FEMA on recovering efforts and providing consultation on restoration and documentation needs for historic preservation after any natural disaster. We are currently working with Kern County on flood recovery efforts and to be documenting any impact to historic structures or archaeological resources. The Texas Historical Commission, FEMA, the Texas Department of Emergency Management are parties to a statewide programmatic agreement to address disaster responses and recovery activities under federal and state law. So that is actually in place and is activated as needed. In the past 8 years, the agency consulted on well over 18,000 disaster recovery projects. And those include everything from floods, tornadoes, ice storms. The agency is also working with the State Office of Risk Management on insurance coverage. We have insurance on those high-risk properties that have been determined and have a policy on the collections that are held in trust. The Sunset Committee recommended a few years ago for the construction of a joint collection storage facility that would actually begin to safeguard assets from 5 agencies: the Historical Commission, Parks and Wildlife, the Preservation Board, Library and Archives, and the General Land Office. The agencies met and we developed a plan. We all agreed that this was something that was desirable in protecting state resources for the future. There's really been no action taken on that recommendation from Sunset, and the agency is eager to find a way to kind of move forward in partnership with agencies that may still be needing that. I know there's been movement in regards to addressing some of the collection storage needs of the GLO with their facility at the Alamo, and then also Library and Archives have been authorized to be able to build a new facility, but that really leaves 3 other agencies. The GLO has other resources, particularly their 2D collection of maps that still have not been addressed. We are actually in the process now with the threat of ongoing threats of hurricane along the coast to secure and bring inland the LaBelle collection, which is the 1686 French warship that was excavated. And we both have a responsibility to safeguard that collection, but also meet our obligation to the French government, which we do have a treaty with on that collection, which they own. The agency also assists with man-made disasters. The Mason County Courthouse, for example, is one which was severely damaged by arson. The interior of the building was gutted and its classical design facade left standing. We worked diligently to help them rebuild that building, incorporating the facades that could be salvaged and rebuild the interior. I was there at the dedication of that, and I am honored to report that the people of Mason County are totally committed to their own preservation. So with that, we forwarded all the material. There's a great deal of material that the agency has to address disaster recovery and assistance to locals as well as individuals, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Bell, thank you for your testimony, and we appreciate what you provided to the committee as well. Members, any questions? Yes, Representative.
Did we have, I was looking at the map of all of our assets on the historical side. That's my microphone too.
Yeah,
The system is a little bit better than the appropriations room system, I must say, but maybe has a different ghost in it. We didn't have any assets that were in low-lying flash flood areas that were impacted in this storm. When I say assets, I mean visitor centers, historical buildings of that kind. Obviously, some historical sites and markers, maybe. But did we have any damage sustained to state assets?
To our
Yes.
property? No.
Okay.
No. We did have staff that were activated. We have staff at Fort McCavitt that were active in helping recover, and then also staff at Fort Martin Scott. But we were very lucky, but we do have resources that are along river systems like Landmark Inn, we have Washington on the Brazos, we have San Felipe. But those are basically higher on the bluff on
Right.
the river that they're really not significantly impacted by flood.
Okay, thank you for that.
But we did, in regards to Caddo, we did run into the same issues with the lack of communication. Unfortunately, when that tornado was within sight, it was too late, and people really had to scramble to be able to run into safety. We were not, the local alarm systems did not go off. People were unaware, so they were truly caught off guard.
Very good, thank you. Members, any other questions? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bell, for being
Thank
here
you.
today. Appreciate what you do for our state.
Thank you.
Chair calls Dr. Timothy Stevenson, Ms. Meg Clark, Mr. Stephen Baskin. Thank you all for being here today. I would like this youth camp panel to cover preparedness to respond to floods and natural disasters. We will start with the state agency with oversight over youth camps, the Department of State Health Services. For the record, your name is Dr. Timothy Stevenson, and you are neutrally testifying on behalf of Texas Department of State Health Services. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Thank you for being here. Please proceed.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to begin by just offering my condolences and sympathies to all victims and those who've been impacted by the floods. Certainly a difficult time for many in the state. Our hearts and prayers are with them. So, as I come this morning, I'd like to share a little bit of an overview of the statutory framework, regulatory framework, and inspection systems that we have in place on youth camps, licensing fees, and ultimately, we also have a youth camp advisory committee, so I'll cover those things. I believe you got some read-ahead material, and those are the slides I'll be going through. So second slide just covers the Health and Safety Code, Chapter 141, which is our statutory framework from which our rules, Texas Administrative Code, TAC, are promulgated. And then finally, we have some website information, compliance and guideline, and frequently asked questions there. Next slide looks at a spot map of where the day camps and residential camps are across the state, approximately 375. Those are about a little more than 50% of those are residential camps, so overnight. The distinction there in statute is if a day camp is normally operated from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. It does allow incidental overnight stays, but vast majority of the day camps do not have any overnight stays. The rest of the criteria and inspection criteria and standards are the same for residential or day camps, and if a day camp were to have a bunkhouse, then those same criteria would be inspected as an overnight camp. Next slide looks at, drills in a little more on the statutory requirements, sort of the big groupings there, looking at youth camp staffing, as I said, day camp versus residential camps, and then also just looking at some of the record keeping. And there is one opportunity for a waiver for a youth camp. It's covered on the next slide. It's a unique waiver with some specific criteria, looking at camps that have been in operation for over 30 years, small camps with less than 80 no more than 80 campers, and a specific population for the counties where those could be allowed. To our knowledge, we've not received any requests for any waivers, nor have we granted any waivers. The next slide just has some big buckets for aspects of the statutory requirements, looking at staffing, sanitation, health and sanitation of some of the facilities, the kitchen, the potable water, and the medical records that are required for staff members, and medical support for the camp, as well as waste disposal, boating equipment and motor vehicles, part of the camp infrastructure, buildings, facilities, fire precautions, making sure if it's a overnight camp, a residential camp, that they have the appropriate number, one bed for each camper at least, and then a lot of requirements regarding the extracurricular activities which each camp must have, at least 2 special activities, could be riflery, archery, horseback riding, water activities, so a lot of attention to those, and then finally staff training to include sexual abuse training and reporting training for all of those staff. So those are parts of the statute and the inspection criteria that we use. Next slide looks at fee structure. There's a little higher fee for an initial inspection, which does have a pre-inspection with the application. So an extra inspection to start with, background checks that go with the staff, and then renewal fees for each year thereafter. I will say that these fees are low. They don't cover the cost as we are obligated to do by statute to try and recover the charge enough to cover the cost associated with running the program. The current fees are about 50% of the requirement. So in our discussions with the Youth Camp Advisory Committee, we are anticipating a rule change, a rule amendment with some increases to these fees the next time the rules are amended. Next slide covers a little bit on staffing and resources. We have about 40 retail sanitarians, sanitation experts that also do retail food inspections. That, of course, synchronizes well with the efforts to look at the food preparation at camps, the water, potable water, and the medical requirements and records for the youth camps. Those sanitarians split their duties between retail food inspections in their area in which they operate, as well as the youth camps. The youth camps, we inspect those yearly. It's not by statute, but we get to every one of the 374, 375 youth camps. We try to get to those annually. During operation, primarily, there are aspects that would be hard for us to verify if we went out of operation season. So things like the operation of the kitchen, the training of the staffers, which might not be completed until they arrive on site for that season. So we focus most of our attention, our inspections during operation season, and we run between 95. Somewhere around 95% above of all of the 375 establishments, getting to those annually. Sometimes, since we are trying to catch them in operation, we don't get to go to all of them June 1 or when the first day they open. We do those during the summer and during the operating season, and some of those might not be operating by the end of the season when we have availability of inspectors. But again, 95% or above for most of the last 5 years, save for the COVID year. So a good frequency on those of inspections. As I mentioned, those staff are also splitting their duties and responsibilities between retail inspections. Just this past session, a new bill was passed which will make the state responsible for all the mobile food vendors and food trucks, some 12,000 of those. These same retail inspectors will be splitting their time with those as well. So it is a little bit of a juggling act looking at the resources for our inspectors. Next slide, just looking down the steps of a license, I did outline that there is a pre-inspection for a new camp and then re-inspection we try to do every summer during operation. Next slide, it looks in big buckets at the inspection criteria, several different areas starting with the actual license, looking at the training of the staff, the medical facilities on staff, emergency preparation, the structure and the repair of the buildings in accordance with code, staff to camper ratios, looking at those 1 to 10 for high demand activities, water activities and things like that, direct supervision of the staff for the campers so that they're in eyesight or earshot of the campers, prohibition of nudity and other aspects of the camp, training for the staff on sexual abuse and reporting. So all of those are parts of the inspection criteria that we have. Next couple of slides look at the emergency plan, which is a requirement for the youth camps to have. The plan has 4 specific requirements: preparation for a disaster, a fatality, an epidemic, and emergency response. So looking at all of those aspects, they have to have a written plan. The camp develops those plans. We don't have a template or a specific plan that they must follow. They develop that in their own operational wisdom and in accordance with local infrastructure that they have there. So we do review those plans. We don't have a copy. We don't retain a copy, but those are reviewed when we do the annual inspections, reviewed by the sanitarians. Again, our inspectors look at those. We verify that they have a plan. We verify that the plan is posted in all of the permanent buildings where staffers may be, and that the staff are trained on the emergency plan. Next slide looks at some of those specific requirements for inspection criteria, especially looking at the medical records, the facility, the way the facilities are built and maintained, the sanitation of those, and then finally staff oversight and training, especially for those special events. Next slide looks at a few of the statistics from 2024. As I said, 374 camps were licensed in 2024. Our inspection frequency, as I said, was just a little under 95% for this past year, for 2024. I'd like to transition a little bit into the Youth Camp Advisory Committee. So there is a Youth Camp Advisory Committee whose purpose is to advise the Executive Commissioner and our Commissioner for DSHS and our program on the rules and the operations of the youth camps. There are 9 members, up to 9 members allowed and required by statute. 2 of those members must be members of the public, so not affiliated with the camp, not affiliated with any particular camp. The rest of those tend to be affiliated with camp operations, so they bring that expertise from the camps, and their review and advice when we're in the rulemaking process is important. The youth camp meets at least annually. We typically meet twice a year. They met in March and have another meeting planned for October this year. The last meeting, we looked at some draft rules and some ideas for rules coming up in the next, as we do the next rule amendment. So with that, sir, I'd like to pause and be happy to try and answer any questions at the time when you'd like.
And thank you very much for your presentation. This time, we'll go to Ms. Meg Clark. And you are neutrally testifying on behalf of yourself and Camp Waldemar, is that correct?
That is correct.
Wonderful, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chairman Metcalf and committee members. Thank you for inviting us to speak with you today. As everyone has said, and as everyone feels, the condolences to all of the families that have lost loved ones in this terrible storm that swept through the hill country. It's hard to see the devastation, and I just know that we're all grieving alongside of those families. I know we're here today to talk about youth camp safety protocols and standards, and I'd like to give a little background on Waldemar and the shared measures we take both that are required from the state and also others that we just consider good practices. This summer did mark our 100th summer running as an all-girls camp. So for nearly a century, we have been working with young ladies, and we're proud of that legacy. We also focus and have always been focused on the safety and the well-being of our children. So at the time of the storm, just to take you to what happened on that day, we had 318 campers. We had 150 staff members on site. The camp director, Jean Stacy, my daughter, who is an assistant director, received a text at around 1:30, and our property manager, or the maintenance manager, who has been there for 40 years, also got up at that time. We could hear the rain, and they began moving canoes off the river. Staff, our full-time staff, were up and on high alert with the rain and throughout the night. All of our camper cabins, which are located above the river, did not take any flood water within the cabins. But because there are numerous low water bridges all the way to camp, to evacuate children at night or any time during a flood would have devastating results. So we have always sheltered in place, and the kids, so our protocol is just to stay put. The storm knocked out, as you know, our power, and we had limited cell service. We were able to notify our families that all the campers were safe and accounted for. So as we discovered the full devastation of the South Fork, we really began to wonder, when was the power going to be returned? We had a main water line that broke, and so actual water to our facility was being diminished. At that time, on July 5th, we made the decision to end our term early. We contacted parents, arranged for a pickup. Once the roads were cleared, the Ingram ISD graciously gave us buses to transport the children into Kerrville, where they were reunited with their families. And we kept a lot of the devastation away from the children, but when they were driving into Kerrville, they could see how devastating the storm was. As required, we maintain an emergency action plan and evacuation plan outlining all of our procedures. For a wide range of scenarios. These plans are updated regularly. Every summer, we begin with a multi-day orientation training all of our staff. We cover everything from it's now hard to see.
Take your time. You're fine.
From emergency protocols, camper supervision, mental health awareness, and severe weather procedures. During heavy storms, campers stay in their cabin or in other inside locations, depending on if they were in class time. If lightning is detected, we shut down the classes and move all the kids to their designated sheltered area. As we've said, one of the unique challenges in a rural situation is cell service coverage is unreliable. Because of this, we rely on a well-established two-way radio system using long and short range walkie-talkies, and it's an essential part of our communication. Part of the beauty of camp is that the children do get to unplug, that they are off their devices. It doesn't work most of the time, but we love that they are unplugged for a moment in time. And then our counselors are encouraged, are not able to use their cell phones around the children as well. So we feel very strongly in working on other communication methods. in addition, though it's not mandated, we invite all of our local first responders and county officials to walk through our property. They review our safety plans. They look at the setup of the facility, and then we work together just to be prepared. Safety is just not a box that we check. It's actually a culture we are cultivating in everything we do, in all of our training, in the way we're laid out, and in everything that we speak. It is truly in the forefront of our mind at all times. I just appreciate you all hearing from us, from our perspective, and having this moment with you all. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We will come back after Mr. Baskin is finished. For the record, Mr. Stephen Baskin, you are neutrally testifying on behalf of yourself and Camp Champions. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm glad you're here today. Please proceed.
Well, first of all, thank you, Chairman Metcalf and every other members of the committee. This is some heavy stuff, and I really appreciate y'all being part of the solution. I'm Steve Baskin. I'm actually the owner emeritus at Camp Champions. I'm also a part owner of a camp in North Carolina called Pinnacle and a day camp in Sharon, Massachusetts called Everwood Day Camp. And currently, I serve as the board chair of the American Camp Association, which is the largest camp association in the world. And I really appreciate the opportunity to address you and talk about how we together can kind of keep kids safe. Prior to camp, I was an investment banker. I worked at Goldman Sachs. And I kind of woke up one day and realized you only get one life, and I wanted to pursue one that would make a difference in kids' lives. It was really important in my life. And I wouldn't be the man I am now had I not had camp. And I wanted to provide those opportunities for campers as much as possible. A little bit of just data. Camps have Texas has about 1,182 camps, according to an economic impact study from the American Camp Association. There are different numbers, so the ACA can actually identify 531 of them in their customer resource area. We have 735 141 licensed camps. So there's different level of the camps out there. There are over 60,000 camp workers, both part-time and full-time. The estimate's about a $3.1 billion industry that pays about $557 million in taxes. But I think that underestimates the impact it has on kids. We're about 75 to 79% are day camp, about 25 to 29% are resident. Some do both. That's why the numbers don't add. And we estimate about 1.5 million campers attend every summer, mostly Texans, but kind of from all over the place. I know everyone in this room is heartbroken. I haven't seen anything like this in my lifetime. And it's been particularly difficult for me on a personal note because my cousin, Jane Ragsdale, was the director at Camp Heart of Hills. They were between sessions, and she died at her camp. And she was one of the finest camp professionals and kindest people I ever know. And it's a loss for the industry, and it's a loss for Hunt. But she won't be forgotten, and I know we're here today, as she would want us to be talking about how we can keep camps in general and camps in the Hill Country safe. Now, Camp Champions, we're located on Lake LBJ. We are not directly impacted by the flood, though we were in a county that had a flash flood watch. Lakes do different things than rivers. After the floods, we opened our doors to campers who had their camps closed. And we had about 57 different campers and 10 counselors joining our community who had arranged to go to other camps. And we just said, come on, we want you to have a chance to heal and not just struggle with this. After any disaster, you need to reflect. You need to learn and need to adapt. And we know you're currently looking at the safety regulations, as you should, to determine what needs to change or be improved. And I want you to know the entire camp industry is deeply committed to join you on this. I'll give you an example. During COVID, we were asked to partner with the strike force that the governor had set. We realized that we did not want anyone, we wanted no kid to be unsafe. But we also worried that kids locked into their homes for long periods of time were not well served. So we talked to epidemiologists, we talked to experts, and with help from the American Camp Association, we coordinated with the strike force and developed a protocol that enabled more camps to operate in Texas than any other place. Most states wouldn't let it happen. We did. No children were hurt, but many got a chance to be children and not be overrun with anxiety. That doesn't happen unless we partner. If we didn't both agree that kids' safety was the most important thing, but then the kids' need to grow and be spectacular is equally important, those things together got those kids in the camp. Our industries come together to act quickly, collaboratively, and we want to do that again. And I want you to know that summer I was really proud to be a Texan. As my friends were going, how the heck did you do it? Are they crazy there? I said, no, we just care. I'm going to share a few recommendations. These are not definitive, but they are ones I've gathered by talking to the work you all done along with the American Camp Association. I think it's clear, we should clarify, I'm going to read here because I don't have this committed to memory. Clarify what needs to be included in emergency plans, and each camp should retain on-site or written site-specific plan approved by the Department of State Health Services, and it should outline how we deal with the following emergency situations: natural disasters, lost campers, fires, transportation emergencies, severe illnesses and injuries, strangers at camp, aquatic emergencies, and other situations as appropriate for each site. When developing these plans, camps should absolutely coordinate with local authorities and first responders. These groups have insights and expertise, not just in protocols, but protocols generally specific to a local area, which differ depending where you are. Site-specific is very important. When developing emergency plans, camps should also coordinate with their insurance companies. They kind of know how bad things can happen. I learn a lot every year from them as well. Emergency plans should then be filed with local authorities so they know what you're going to do. Camps should develop a communication system that will work even in the event of a cell outage or power outage. So that would include things like two-way radios, as Meg mentioned. It could include air horns. It could also include good old-fashioned, here is how I'm going to tell two people who are going to run out and tell two other people, because sometimes that's the way you get it done. Obviously, in some circumstances, it doesn't work, but you want to have an overlapping system so there's always a way you can get the word out. Camps should have multiple interlocking methods to assess weather and other emergencies. These methods can include weather sites, local news, a series of contacts. For example, we know people in Mason and Llano, so we know when the river's rising. We have people in the other area that if there's a tornado warning, have they seen a funnel cloud? You get on the phone and you talk. You know the local authorities. We know the people who run the dams on our lake. You also want to have lightning alert devices and NOAA radios. And I want to specify that you should have at least those last two work when everything else fails. Radios continue to get signals when power goes down in a way that my internet might not, right? Camps should have a very clear way to get word out to parents that everything's okay. Or if it's not okay, get that word out as well. When severe weather happens, camps need a clear system to assure that the members of the leadership team get going. We do not have everyone pull all-nighters every day. That would not be good for them, which would mean for bad supervision for the kids. But you get a weather watch, someone's awake. At that point, you click to another level of awareness, and you start monitoring. If you go from a watch to a warning, you activate a whole other group of people. And then you start to take action specific to what the emergency is. There are different actions if the emergency is a fire, or a tornado or a flood. But people are up, as Meg wonderfully pointed out, when it happens. Next page. Camp should clearly be trained in these procedures. Their staff should be trained, and they should be posted in appropriate areas. Not in their entirety. We don't need 30-page binders in every cabin, but with very clear, if this is where you go. I think some issues that need to be thought through. Every camp's physical and programmatic needs are different. There are special needs camps. So you have ambulatory limitations to what you do. So you can't assume that the right answer is the same everywhere. I want to stress that there's no single standard for different kinds of safety, and they vary with localities. Lakes flood differently than rivers. Rivers flood differently than creeks. Each have their own hydrodynamic consequences or considerations, and they need to be taken in consideration. Emergency plans need to be site-specific. I've said that several times, but I think that's really important. I think it's a side note here. I think y'all should know, and we should know what the emergency procedures are. I would suggest that you're not posted everywhere. A lot of security experts say you don't want people who might be interested in knowing where children are going be able to simulate an accident or emergency in order to get people are. Same as with like a active shooter. So you want to know that we have good procedures, but you don't share it with the world necessarily. Safety sirens and safety drills should be handled appropriately, but let's do it in a way that doesn't create anxiety for the kids. And I wholeheartedly say that cell phones should not be part of the camper's experience. It is the only place they're tech-free and happy. So let me conclude on a personal note and return to my cousin Jane. Over a year ago, I attended a wedding. It was one of my campers was a groom from Camp Champions, and one of Jane's campers was the bride. Of her 11 bridesmaids, 9 of them were her heart friends. And when Jane arrived, you would have thought Beyonce or Taylor Swift had rolled up. There was a buzz in the audience. And afterwards, they all insisted on having a big Camp Heart of the Hills photo. And one of the gals said, "Can you believe that Jane's here?" And one of them said, "Don't be silly. Jane's always here. She's there when you need her." I kind of feel like we need her now. Kind of know I do. I feel like she's here. I think she would be saying, with words of encouragement, "Hey, cuz, be less nervous and focus on what you need to do. Be there for the kids." Like every other camp director, she wanted to positively impact children, but she also understood it can only be done on a firm foundation of safety and health, a fanatical dedication to keeping kids safe and healthy. Those were always her and our first priorities. So let me conclude by saying together we can and should do more to improve the safety of campers. We can do more as camp together. Together we can do more as the state of Texas. And we look forward as camp professionals working with you to provide the best practices and real camp experiences so you can craft any rules or legislation.
Mr. Baskin, thank you for your testimony, and thank the entire panel. So very familiar with camp myself. My daughters are fourth generation campers at Camp Waldemar. And my grandmother started there the second year it was open. Started in 1926, right?
Yes.
So she started in 1927. And it's a very special place. And they grow. I could not say it better than what you just said, Mr. Baskin, about the cell phones. It is a place for them to unplug and get away. I have twin daughters, and we keep their phones at home while they're at camp, obviously, and the camp is a month long. And when they get home, they ask for their phones, and they must have over 1,000 text messages. And so it's very nice that they are able to unplug and be girls and grow and not have to worry about, what's the popular makeup brand to put on, what clothes. It's just a very special place. And Meg, I thank you and your mom and those before y'all that helped make it a special place. And I know Camp Champions is the same way, and as well as other camps throughout our great state. But thank you all for helping our children in this great state grow and become children that they are to future leaders of this great state and nation as well. So thank you all for what you all do for our communities. But regarding your testimony on your recommendations, I would love for you to get a copy of that to Lauren, our wonderful clerk here, and we will distribute that to each member that's here today so that we can begin to look at that. But again, I warn us as members of the legislature about cell phone policies at camps. So with that regard, members, any questions for this panel? Representative Vasuk.
And Steve, I think you honor your cousin's legacy.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you bringing your suggestions to us. And, it's a heavy issue. Just like anything in life, hindsight is always 20/20. And sometimes we can't fully anticipate how events will unfold. And like you said, every single camp is different. And I struggle a lot. When we're in this role, it kind of feels like when an issue happens that we have to respond in some way, because as the lawgiver, we have a responsibility to the people of Texas to keep them safe. But I don't know all the answers to that. And what I want to walk through a little bit with the panel and just think maybe for my own conclusions here, whether action needs to be taken by the legislature is just when we think about safety at our camps. Obviously, the legislature could pass safety standards for the camps. We could. I don't know if that's the best thing for us to do because they're all so different. But then I also don't know if relying entirely on and putting the whole burden on the agency to do it is the right approach. I don't necessarily know. But Dr. Stevenson, as I read the Health and Safety Code, we have a chapter that regulates our youth camps in Chapter 141. Is that right? And I'm looking at, in Section 141.009, we've given the Commission the authority to adopt rules to establish health and safety standards for youth camps. And we don't specify, we don't require, the legislature is not requiring y'all to do anything specific underneath that. We're just kind of giving you this blanket authority. And so I can understand that, it's open-ended, right? And maybe the legislature could be more clear in this, I don't know. But one of the standards that we indicate you could do, and by you, I just mean the commission, right? And this is something that's been in place for decades. So this is not a person issue, this is just a structural issue, is standards relating to safe buildings. That's one of the standards. And the commission has adopted that. If I look, and your presentation drew me to the chapter provision in 25 TAC 265.13, we have those site and facility requirements. And the first one in A is safety of camp facility. The buildings, structures, and grounds shall not present a fire, health, or safety hazard. Is that right?
Yes, sir. And
where I struggle, hindsight's 20/20. So when I look back at this issue, and we're always going to learn, is a overnight accommodation for minors at a youth camp, if that is located in not just a floodplain, but in a flash flood plain, where you have the situation, and I agree wholeheartedly with the no cell phones. I mean, I totally get that and I agree with that. But where it's dark, they're in a low-lying area, and the flood comes quickly. And there may be some things we can do, and I love your list about things that we can look at, but should one of the standards be that you just don't have overnight accommodations in the floodplain? Because, and I'd be interested what the panel thinks about that. I don't know if that's the right answer or not. But one thing I know, Camp Waldemar, right? None of your overnight accommodations are in that area. And I've looked it up actually on the GIS for Kerr County. You're up on a bluff, right? You're above that. But some camps were directly in that area. So, what does the panel think about? Should either the legislature or the commission have a standard that just says you cannot have an overnight accommodation for minors in a flash floodplain? I mean, do we need to be that specific, or should it just be more broadly and leave flexibility? What does the panel think about that?
Yes, sir. I think if we were to take that stance as an agency, we would need a legislative support, statutory support for that. I think of different ways to manage risks. That is certainly one way. If there's no bunk houses in the floodplain, then you've mitigated that particular risk in a very firm way. Absence of that prohibition, looking at all sorts of other redundant systems that might be in place, and then again, that's a risk assessment, risk balance. Again, prohibiting any bunk houses in the floodplain would be a very fail-safe mode. I think absence, and we would need, I think, statutory support for that. Otherwise, I think looking at multiple redundant systems, something other than a cell phone signal and those sorts of things, if a camp wants to choose to still have bunk houses, if they were allowed by the statute to have, as they are now, to put them in the floodplain, what are the other redundant systems? And I would also ask support for the agency that is a multiple, sort of a multi-agency function. If we look at the entire warning system, as was spoken about earlier today, that's broader than just youth camps. If we were to look at Texas Department of Emergency Management having some oversight in the plans, and/or local county judges or emergency services divisions, so that we had some statutory support to bring those into the oversight and approval as well of the emergency plans.
Understood. Thank you so much. Ms. Clark, or Mr. Bax, if either one of you want to weigh in, and I don't know if that's the right solution or not, but what do you think?
Is there a official differentiation between floodplain and flash floodplain?
That's a great question. You know, I know that in our FEMA maps, we have special flood hazard areas, and I don't know if that is specific to flash flooding or otherwise. And there may be a way to define it, and you also have the different planes, the 100-year, the 500-year, and so on.
Well, the reason I ask is in October of 2018, y'all may remember, we got some rain. And we got so much rain up water from the Llano that it flooded Mason, it flooded Llano, and the Kingsland Bridge, which is 25 to 27 feet above the water level, was blown out from the side. We're in the flood warning went to our area. We're 6 miles down from where that bridge was destroyed. By the time it got to our camp, we had water 18 inches into the cabin that was racing at about 1 mile an hour. It was just like rising bathwater. Lakes, because we have a dam on the other side, it just flows over or it spreads out. There's not rushing water in lakes.
Right.
You actually put cabins close to the lake because it has an evaporative cooling effect. So the cabins are cooler, and one of the bigger risks that kids can suffer from is heat. So having the ability to have camp cooler is good for kids' health. Now, if I thought a cabin was going to be washed away, or it was going to get more than 18 or 20 inches into a cabin, I would not have a cabin there.
Right.
But, I will say, when we had similar things, we evacuated our water cabins because basically we didn't want the kids to get wet. Didn't want their shoes to get messed up. But that's not that kind of risk is different. So at a lake camp, and I can name some of those, have a different one. And what I do, I really appreciate your spirit of inquisition. Not like the Inquisition. You're being inquisitive.
Sure.
and want to learn. I don't think that's the right rule to promulgate. I think if there's an ability to differentiate between floods that race, that rage, different than rise like bathwater and don't get above a certain level, then that kind of rule could be promulgated. But
so maybe if you had an area where it is a susceptible risk to raging flood, that might be one category that may need a bright line rule. And then, where you have very slow rising water, that's probably a totally different. And it makes perfect sense too, right?
Yeah.
Because I think about, there are areas along the coast that probably have youth camps that theoretically would be in a floodplain, but that's totally different. That's only going to flood really if you have large amounts of rains over extended periods of time. I know my district is a bowl in the middle, right?
Right.
It happens, or a hurricane comes through and they're going to evacuate the camp anyway. So I see what you're saying, that a bright line rule based off of just floodplain is not perhaps the right way to look at it, but differentiating this idea between rapid flood rise and slow flood rise.
Yeah, it's how fast it goes and how high it will go.
Right.
I think are all considerations. And again, I really, really admire and appreciate your effort to find the right language. And I see no desire to go and throw out an easy blanket rule that would fit on a T-shirt because it's easy to understand. There is nuance here. But I think if you find a single camp director that doesn't seem focused on safety, that ought to get your hackles up. But I appreciate that, and we'd be delighted to talk to you more about what might be the right
Sure.
rules to promulgate.
Sure. And I appreciate your suggestions. The last thing I was going to note about is, the radios. And are the radios that y'all have at your camps now, are those like the typical, I just think growing up as a kid, we'd get those, you go to Radio Shack.
Yeah.
For all the Generation Zs out there, this was a store that sold electronic communications equipment. It was a great store. That and Blockbuster. Really, really enjoyed those. Rest in peace. But, we go to Radio Shack, we get those little bitty walkie-talkies, the 4 channels, and they last maybe a couple miles. Do y'all use those, or do you have ham radio? Because I'm a ham radio operator myself. Do y'all use hams, or what do y'all have?
We actually use 2 different types of radios. So one is just received at a shorter distance, and then we rent a hardier, and I'm not technically savvy, but it goes a lot further.
Sure.
So we can communicate to girls on horseback in the back pasture to the front office. So we use 2 different types.
Right.
Boy, I'm not a Z, and I could not tell you any more than what I just said. But my
Right.
technical guy could tell you all the details you would want to know.
Got it. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Well, that's all I had. Thank you guys very much.
Your technical guy would be Chris, right?
Yes, exactly.
Representative Ayala.
First of all, thank you all for your testimony today. We have another committee looking at this, and they'll break up into subcommittees. And you look at this process, and you see the value in something like this. That is a tragedy that's happened, both to life and property. And what we try to do is say, how can we fix this? You can't fix yesterday, but you can use yesterday to fix tomorrow. And the folks that I see, and I've been in this office now, this is my 2nd term, those that have been here a while, you see the ones that listen. There are a lot of good orators that are in office, but the ones who listen and really evaluate and do analysis, and they collaborate with the experts, professionals, and the people that have 100 years of experience and all this other experience that you all have. That's where you come up with the fixes, the solutions, the improvements that make things better for the next, the future and the next generation of campers. And that's what we want to do here in Texas. And I'll be the first to say I don't know the answers. There's a term that was crossing my mind when you were talking, Chairman of the suit, was the floodway. There is a floodplain and there's a floodway, and the floodway is more of a moving water, if I remember my terminology correctly. And there's probably some analysis to do there. There's probably some, what is the right risk assessment and risk management, and what makes sense, right? Because you take it to one extreme, let's just bubble wrap the kids and put them in this and that and the other. Okay, that's not what we're trying to do. That said, I appreciate both of you for visiting with me. I think it was last week. My days are running together. And doing that with those of us. Again, that's how we become informed. That's how we can legislate best. And just, hats off to you all making your industry, this experience for campers even better. And also letting people know who don't have a camping experience how special it is. I've had the privilege of coaching youth football for 15 years, and I kind of liken it to something like that. It's investing in children in some way, shape, or form, and how rewarding that is. So that's the goal here. It's about the kids. Thank you for loving on them, and let's see what we can do to make this better. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Orr.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being with us today. I wanted to revisit the 15 standards that we discussed, but also wanted to go back, Ms. Clark, to a statement that you made about having first responders invited to your camp. Can you speak to that? How often do you do that exercise, and how has the response been locally to that?
Yes, we try and do it every year, and the response has been amazing. We feed them lunch, and they come. They're very excited to be a part. I have found the Hunt community, the Kerr County, to be incredibly responsive and willing. They love the camps and are part of our security. Even we hire local off-duty sheriffs as our security guards, so they have always been very responsive. Thank you for your question.
Well, if you've been there for 100 years, you've probably had generations of those kind of people helping you. My next question is for Steve. You're a member of the American Camp Association. You're the board president, is that right?
Board chair, yes, ma'am.
Board chair. Do other states have this be a standard for their camps, or do you know? That they have a walkthrough with first responders and a relationship with their local emergency disaster team?
It is the American Camp Association has a peer-reviewed sort of accreditation process, and one of the there are up to 280 standards, depending on if you have horseback. There's not as many standards. About 10 of them, 15 of them are mandatory, and one is vetting all of your stuff with local experts. So that really is a best practice. Now, actually coming on property, I don't know what that is. Every state is different. It is a real, it's odd. You can go from Vermont, which is crazy tight, along with New York, to New Hampshire, which is kind of like meh. But for the most part, the best ones, think of your local EMTs and fire departments and police as part of the solution. Because any emergency you can think of, if you have an active shooter, you want to be with the police. If you have a child who's injured, you want the EMTs to know. We're to a point where our EMTs know that once they're on our property, they lose the siren, they lose the lights. Because we're going to be there waiting for them, but we don't want the rest of the kids to get worried, right? And every one of them knows that because we bring them in. I think that is a best practice, and I think it should be encouraged. And they want to know they're helping kids.
Right.
Right? And they want to know that if it comes down to it, they're ready. And it's fun, too. I mean, it's a joyous day because it's not often you get to work with the emergency people when it's not an emergency.
Right.
So that's always pleasant.
All right. Well, thank you. We may reach out to you to get some assistance looking at some of the other state propositions.
I will say we are, my best friend is the head of our government relations, and he has started a project with the ACA, American Camp Association, to find best practices in different states. It's in a nascent phase, but we, for example, have gathered up the best policies for fire standards. We're trying to get those, and if there's one in particular that was interesting to the state of Texas, I'm in a position where I can move that to the top of the list.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Dr. Stevenson, is this what you're when you speak of needing legislation to help cure some of these issues, do you think something like that would be?
Yes, ma'am. Making that a requirement to, for them to participate and to be involved in the plan, that the camp has coordinated that with, I think the camp should probably take the initiative to do that with the emergency support function that may be there, whether it's a rural county or a metropolitan area.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, Representative Carter.
Again, from everyone, and especially from me, I thank you so much for coming today. I'm an avid camper, and I just cannot tell you how impressed I am. My question is more about a general overview. I know our Parks and Wildlife witness mentioned there are 22 state parks impacted, and I think you had mentioned there are almost 1,200 camps in Texas.
Almost 1,200 camps. Now, some of those might be out of a church, a small couple-week-long thing. I think, what was the number of 100 of the 141 camps? Was
374.
374. So what you and I probably think of as a camp is closer to 400 than 1,200, but the number's somewhere in there.
Understood. How many on the Guadalupe? Did I miss that number?
20?
In our area, I think about 18.
18,
Yes,
okay.
the north and south, and when you say
And
about-
post-confluence, yeah.
Okay, so my question would be more from an aerial map. How could the local governments, the cities and the counties, how could they act for future preparedness for emergencies like this, the local governments, legislatively? Do you have recommendations?
I think they could not act unilaterally. They couldn't go in wearing their regulatory hat as an emergency support district and go to the camps and say, we're here to help you. But conversely, if the camp had the requirement to have their plan approved is a difficult word, but at least have some consulting on the plan and involvement and a record of that, I think that would help. While we're on the camp numbers, there are some camps that are not included in the 374 that are at institutes of higher education learning, so universities and those sorts of higher education campuses. Those camps are not included in my number, and there are several of those. That's probably the biggest disparity between the numbers of the total camps versus the youth camps as I focused on residential and day youth camps.
All right, thank you.
I don't know if it's feasible. I wonder if there were a person that would actually call each camp, in our area, if we knew this area were going to be impacted in that way. 18 camps. Could there be, a couple of people that would actually reach out and say, we're here, what do you need? We're just going to be in communication. What I felt in the heat of the moment, we needed a quarterback. And though the efforts were monumental, and I feel like they did an incredible job, at times it was hard to know who was in charge. So I would love to know a point person to reach out to.
Some sort of emergency preparedness system where there's communication with counties or
Yes.
cities that may be impacted is what I was thinking. If that's a reality for your camping association and all the camps, whatever natural disaster, that there may be a position created. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here.
Rep. Kerwin, I have a guy working for me named Michael Moak, and he knows everybody. I said before, when someone calls to see, are they opening the floodgates? Moak calls them. He knows 4 people in Mason, 4 people in Llano. I think Moak needs to be not at every camp. There needs to be a Moak-like person who knows what questions to ask. Is the water falling in this floodplain or this plain that feeds into these tributaries? Is it happening there? Who kind of knows the hydrodynamics of any water system really, really well. And he or she needs to have someone else that can be there if they're on out and they are working the phones. The moment stuff like this happens, because that's the thing that makes it so I never have to panic. Because I got lots of information coming from different areas. So if someone were to say, look, we have it's 18 inches parked over an area that feeds the south branch of the Guadalupe. We haven't quite seen it like that. It's not moving. This is going to come fast. That would be really, really useful. But you can't expect every camp to have that level of expertise or that level of information gathering. So what else they might be able to how they can gather information, I don't know. But someone to assimilate that information that's at a municipal or state level strikes me as not a bad idea. But you didn't pay me to do that.
And what are your feelings about the siren system? There's so much information out there, how that could be coordinated to be effective. What do you think about that?
I have mixed emotions. It would depend on the sound of to get right down to it, how it sounds. If it's so alarming to children, that worries me, to traumatize children. I would want to be very cautious, where if it's more of an internal way that they're familiar with, a sound that we practice and a sound that that just may not strike fear in a child, that would be my concern. Naturally, we want everyone to be safe, so I don't have a good answer.
Meg, can I add one point? It would also have to do with the frequency it would be used. Right? If this is something that triggers only when the water reaches a certain level, I want that thing loud. I want everyone's attention. I want them scared. But if we're going to test it weekly during the summer to make sure everyone's okay, that's not a great idea. You get this? So it would be the specifics of it. What triggers it? What makes it happen? Otherwise, you want it less jarring, I think. I worry a little bit about us feeding into a cycle of anxiety. Those of us who've been doing this 30 years see kids are getting more anxious. I think the phones have a lot to do with that. I could give you chapter and verse if you had an hour. I'll save you that. But if it's something that only kicked in an emergency and reliable, that sounds to me not a bad idea.
Right.
Thank you.
So to tag on to that, I gather from the two of y'all are experts in this area. You're okay with a system, a warning system, siren, but the question is, what does it sound like?
And
Is that-
frequency.
And what
frequency.
activates it?
Right.
Is it
Got
just
that.
somebody who sort of says, well, we're in a watch and not a warning, time to hit the button? Or here is what really triggers it. It's just, you also don't want it to be like some of the warnings you get. On the 7th, I got 17 different warnings, and the water never even went over my seabed at Champions. So it's
Yeah.
hard not to start to paying less attention to it.
Yeah, and I think we need to work on that. For example, I don't need a silver alert in Brownsville, Texas, whenever I'm in Conroe, Texas. Things like that. So I think that, but
But let me make it clear. If it helps keep kids safe, we're all about it.
yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Go.
And I do want to also agree with Steve that on the 7th, and we had a flood the very next week in Hunt, there were so many alerts. And it didn't flood to the degree that the alert system was portraying. So everyone was responding and panicked. And
This
so
is July 7th?
Yes.
So a couple days
What-
after.
A couple days after it started to rain, we would get an alert. And then I believe,
Yeah, I understand.
days are just a blur
Yeah,
right now.
right.
But the Monday after, we actually did have another flood,
Yeah.
but we had alerts leading up to it, afterwards. They just weren't
Calibrated.
calibrated.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Diallo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I think you answered my question. Actually, one little follow-up. I understood that there is a siren system, and again, it's got to be triggered for the right thing at the right time. It's got to mean what it's supposed to mean when it goes off. But to your, I think, concern about the noise traumatizing or having this, in my mind, I went deer in the headlights kind of. But aren't these systems, oftentimes, they just do a quick flash of it at noon on a daily basis, just so every day you know what it sounds like, you know it's noon, you know it's not an emergency or alarm, it's just to familiarize yourself or something like that. I've heard of those systems doing that, especially these tornado-type systems. So I say that just because perhaps, the children would be familiar with that sound at noon, knowing that's just a test they do every day at noon for 3 seconds or whatever it is. Probably messes up your lunch a little bit, but other than that, I just throw that out there because would that help with the concern you have?
I would love to hear all the options and look at what has been successful across the United States. I am certain there are methodologies that have been time-tested and are very effective, and so would love to know more about really all of them.
Thank you.
And as long as it's not abjectly terrifying,
Right.
you could maybe make a fun camp tradition out of it. Right? There might be
Right.
something you salute or wave or something at noon when the thing goes up for 3 seconds. That's something you can do as long as we know it's not arbitrary.
And sir, a verbal notification in 10 minutes, we're going to do a test of the alarms or the systems, notification system, so they know, and/or flashing lights may very well have a similar effect without the glaring effect. Wouldn't want to rely solely on lights, but that often is a part of the notification system.
Very good. Members, any other questions for this outstanding panel? Thank you. I have a couple of comments. So you're going to get us your recommendations.
Make sure they're
Mr. Baskin, you are.
No, I know.
Okay.
I will do so.
You're going to make sure
I'm
somebody
slightly
gets it to
overwhelmed,
Lauren.
So I'll make it, you know how to get in touch with me. Okay.
Perfect. And she will give that to every member who's here today present. And then also, there are others in the audience who represent different camps and organizations. Please reach out to those. I would love to see those recommendations as well. I believe everybody, has a dog in this fight. And then also, Ms. Clark, you mentioned about things we probably shouldn't do, such as cell phones in campers' hands because it takes away from the camping tradition. I'm in that camp. And so I also would like recommendations of things we should not do, such as those. And one of those being maybe it's an evacuation for I'm going to talk about Waldemar because I know it, not as well as you do, but I do know it. As far as evacuating, they can just go uphill instead of going through low water bridge crossings. That'll be more dangerous. And so I don't want us to have a knee-jerk reaction saying you need to evacuate your campground because sometimes we're going to put citizens and children at risk by going across those ways. Also, we're not here just to talk about floods. We could talk about tornadoes. We could talk about wildfires. So I hate we're having to have this conversation, but as Representative Diallo said, we can learn from yesterday in preparation for tomorrow. And so I thank you all for your time today. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for doing what you're doing for young children and their families and for future Texans. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you as we move forward. God bless you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Chair calls Mr. Justin Bregel, Mr. Randy Dolly, and Mrs. Erica Boyd. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you all for being here today. I would like this travel and lodging panel to cover emergency preparedness and the impacts of the recent flooding on Texas travel and lodging industry. We're going to begin to give Mr. Justin Bregel.
Correct, yeah.
Thank you. For the record, your name, Mr. Justin Bregel. You're neutrally testifying on behalf of Texas Hotel and Lodging Association. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Please proceed.
Absolutely. Thank you. My name is Justin Bregel. I'm General Counsel for the Texas Hotel and Lodging Association. Thank you, Chairman, for calling this hearing, and thank you for inviting us to testify before you all. Texas Hotel and Lodging Association represents approximately 6,000 lodging properties across the state of Texas. We're the largest state lodging association in the nation. We've been in existence since 1903, and I've been on board since 2008. Since 1903, we've seen a lot of disasters across the state of Texas. Our association has a lot of experience in responding to disasters, and our members certainly do as well. Just briefly, what our role is as an industry in disaster. It may be somewhat obvious, but at the same time, I think it's probably worthwhile to lay it out. First of all, we work to prepare well in advance for any disaster that we can anticipate. Hurricanes possibly every year, we cross our fingers. But we work with our local governments, with the state agencies as well to determine what level of hurricane threat we may have. Other types of disasters such as flooding, wildfires, et cetera. We work with our members and with local governments to try and determine what the risk is in advance, and then communicate with our members, with the hoteliers, so that they can be prepared in that regard. When a disaster becomes apparent, obviously it depends a little bit on the type of disaster we're talking about. We begin with communication, first with our members, with the hoteliers, to help prepare them for their operations, for the potential influx of evacuees or individuals, or maybe they're in the path of harm and they need to get their hotel guests out of the path of harm, right? So we're going to work there to communicate with those individual lodging operators. We communicate with TDEM and other state agencies to determine whether or not we're going to have any potential evacuation routes. And I'm going to talk in a second about the aftermath, but primarily in the lead up to a disaster, try to determine whether or not there'll be any evacuations, whether there's going to be any particular need for us to get folks out of harm's way. And then likewise with local governments. We coordinate with each one of these entities. The hotels, we work with our hotel members, the hotel brands, and then with the governmental entities. With regard to the Kerr County flooding, for example, we immediately sent messages to elected officials in that area. It's helpful for us to have a relationship with those local governments. We were very fortunate that we do actually have a very close relationship with Kerr County and with the city of Kerrville. We're able to reach out to them right away to try and determine what sort of help we could offer to them. And then in the aftermath, again, it's going to be a bit dependent on the type of disaster. So, for Kerr County, as an example, luckily for our industry, most of the lodging properties did not suffer serious damage. We were above the floodway and the floodplain, our properties, with some exceptions, but for the most part, we were. And in that region of Texas, as you all well know, most of the business when it comes to lodging properties in the summertime comes from leisure travel. When a disaster like this occurs, when there's weather that occurs, we get a lot of cancellations, understandably, from leisure travelers who would ordinarily be there. The benefit to that, though, is that opens up that lodging property for first responders and for individuals who live in the area who need temporary housing, either to respond to the disaster or because their home was wiped away. So we start coordinating then with individual governmental entities, nonprofits, NGOs, et cetera, to determine how we can help. And our members donated hundreds of room nights over the course of July to those disaster response efforts. And then after that, we move on to the recovery phase, right? And that, again, will be determined a lot by the type of disaster. We worked through Harvey years ago. That disaster recovery took a very long time. There were folks displaced for in some cases, a year or more, living in lodging properties, right? But try to determine how we can accommodate those individuals. And then, to put our tourism and economic hat on as well, this area of Texas is going to need some support for years to come. Certainly the individuals that lost their homes. But as I already mentioned, this area of Texas is dependent on tourism economically, right? That is one of the major sources of economic activity, particularly in the summertime. And so I think as a state, we're going to need to do some work here to invest economically in this area and try to rebuild that tourism economy. And so that's where our role and how we sort of work. And there's a lot of more nuance there. And it's the afternoon already. I don't want to take much more of your time, but I'll answer any questions y'all may have about how we respond to disasters as an industry.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Bregel. And for the record, your name is Randall Dally?
Dally, yes.
Dally. And you are neutrally testifying on behalf of the Texas Association of Campground Owners. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, please proceed.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody on the committee and that. My name is Randall Dally, and I'm past president of the Texas Association of Campground Owners, which we have 432 members in the state as of this morning. And I also own a campground, and I also serve as the association legislative liaison. As Texans know, Texas is a huge state. Unfortunately, when an event such as the Kerrville flood occurred on July 4th, our state seems to shrink in the eyes of potential visitors, and the whole state can become affected. I know this as I had several phone calls from potential guests who were concerned about the weather and if I was open and how badly the flood damage was in my park. And I'm over 5 hours away from the hill country. Our association has been in contact with hill country parks. One of our member parks had some slight damage, and a non-member park just basically is non-existent anymore. And their phones are not ringing. The parks that are open, their phones are not ringing. No reservations are being made. We discussed this on our July 30th board meeting, and we'll soon be launching a media campaign showing our hill country is open, just like the rest of the state. In no way does this diminish the losses that were incurred, as we always remember and learn from our experiences. When I bought my campground in 2002, I never dreamed that 3 years later, a major hurricane named Rita would come visit me. Luckily, I had minimal damage, and it taught me a lot about the disaster that in a hurricane, you're by yourself for about 48 hours. Don't count on anybody coming to help you. Don't count on anything because they just simply can't. So you have to have a plan. And just what's happening in the hill country after the hurricane, my phone wasn't ringing. I didn't receive any reservations. And the negative press was not very helpful either. As a campground owner, I try to plan for every eventuality. Our association has a great resource section for emergency planning. I've wrote several of those plans, especially the hurricane one. And the most difficult thing to plan for is a once-in-a-lifetime event that has not occurred before and might not ever occur again. You must balance your plans not to scare away the visitors, but also ensure their safety. You must communicate the plans with your guests and know that in an emergency, they will not remember what you told them, and they will all want to be the boss and take charge. How many people look at the emergency plan in every hotel room when you check in to find your closest exit? Just recently, I watched an American airline flight have a blowout on a tire in Denver, and all the people coming down the slides had their carry-on luggage. So just because you tell people to do something, they're probably not going to remember. Our tourists visit Texas to see the beauty. Visitors want to camp by a lake, by a stream, by a river, along a bluff, and they have no desire to camp 2 or 3 miles away from the river or lake when they're out camping. So you have to balance the need. We have to remember that Texas also competes with 49 other states for our visitors. In many ways, my campground was lucky when Rita struck. It was pretty much built to the NFPA 1194 standards, which is how to build a campground, and mitigates as much as possible the damage that can happen, and it requires every park to have an evacuation plan filed with the local authorities. While every city or county might not have a designated person, you still have to have the evacuation plan. We worked hard, our association worked hard in 2023 and 2025 to pass this code. It'd be codified into law, so there's one generic plan for the whole state. Unfortunately, our plans kind of fell through. It never got a hearing in the Senate, but we're going to reintroduce that plan next session unless it's picked up in the special sessions. So thank you for your time, and I'll answer any questions upon the end.
Thank you very much. Miss Erica Boyd, we have you testify neutrally on behalf of Texas Travel Alliance. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Thank you for being here. Please proceed.
Thank you for having me. Chairman Metcalf, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Erica Boyd. I'm the president and CEO of the Texas Travel Alliance, the voice of the travel and tourism industry here in Texas and across our great state. First, I want to express my personal and on behalf of the industry, our condolences and our prayers to the families and the communities who've been impacted by the flooding and the devastation. It is truly horrific and something that we appreciate you giving the time and attention to. This is from personal experience. I know this. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint for recovery and helping folks for a long time to come. So thank you for this. We are truly grateful for your commitment to understanding what has happened and how we can learn from that, and the thoughtful consideration that will go into coming up with recommendations that benefit both our residents and our visitors across the state. As we know, visitors were very heavily impacted from the devastation that happened across our communities. And, as an industry, one of the things that we offer our members is education and professional training to address crisis situations. So how do we communicate out in these situations? How do we best plan for and then prepare for these situations and make sure that we are ready to deal with these? As Justin mentioned, we also work with TDEM. They do a wonderful job reaching out to the business community and helping us understand the threats that are coming, how we should be prepared, what we should share with our members, and providing us with great resources to do that. And one of the things that we have discovered in listening to the testimony that's come out of the hearings in the past couple of weeks is that communicating with our visitors and helping our visitors to know how to be safe in our destinations and what to do in emergency situation, that's a role that we can play as the storytellers of our destinations and attracting visitors to our communities. It's important that we are helping our visitors to know how to be safe in our destinations. So that's a role that we stand ready to help with across our destinations, and happy to work with y'all on solutions along the way. And I'd be glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions for this panel? Seeing none, I will just say what I said to the last panel. If y'all have any recommendations, please provide those to us, and we'll be sure to get those to the committee members as well.
I do have one thought I'd like to add. So, in talking about campgrounds and sirens and camp facilities, my kids also go to summer camp. I do want to also echo having no cell phones at summer camps, I think, is really important. But the other means of communication is very important, especially for the adults and the counselors who are often young adults who are often kids themselves. My family owns an RV, and we are RV campers as a family. Oftentimes when you're in your RV and the air conditioner is running, you aren't going to hear anything that's happening outside, especially if it's raining. So while I do think siren systems can be a useful tool and should be part of the conversation, they may or may not be loud enough to be helpful everywhere in every situation, but I do think it should be part of the conversation.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much.
Sure.
Any follow-up?
And I think, you asked for, maybe some thoughts. Just briefly, more
Yes.
coordination continuing, right? We continue to have elected officials, particularly the local level, that turn over time and leave office. And so we continue to have to work to reestablish those relationships. And so as this body works with state agencies and local governments, an emphasis on continuing efforts to increase coordination between the different governmental entities and the lodging sector and the travel and tourism sector. We're here for you. We'll attend any meeting you all would like us to, and we pledge our support. So that's our pledge to y'all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I'd just like to
Please,
add
please
one
do.
other thing, and they dealt with it in the last topic, is the false alerts. The county I live in is 79 miles long. So I get an alert for something that's 79 miles away because I'm in that county. I just turned the alerts off on my phone because it became so annoying to be woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning for a thunderstorm that is not affecting me. That's maybe the wrong thing to do, but the false alerts are really bad.
Absolutely. Yeah, we keep hearing that. Yes. Thank you very much. Members, any other questions? Thank you all for being here today. Please feel free to submit whatever recommendations, the do's and the don'ts.
Will do.
We'd love to hear those.
Thank you for
so
inviting
much.
us.
Appreciate you. Members, that concludes today's agenda. Is there any further business for the committee to address? Hearing none, the Cultural, Recreation, and Tourism Committee stands adjourned, subject to the call of the chair. Thank you, members.